One, two, three.
Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from our secret ice fortress and laboratory high in the Swiss Alps. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. Keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground as Sumo and Smokestack direct your attention to a higher dimension. Are you ready? Stand by.
How is your corpus callosum? Where did that rooster come from?
That's Mike.
Okay.
He's my
I was
rooster.
like, interesting. How is your corpus callosum today?
I mean,
I gotta work on my recording. I always hear myself breathing too much. It's okay.
Well, it just adds to the intimacy of the piece.
That's true. That's true. You gotta reframe it. You gotta philosophize it. You reframe it.
Yep.
I went for a haircut the other day.
Oh yeah? How'd it turn out?
It's fine. I got it. My hair is still long, but now it looks long on purpose instead of just being homeless.
Okay, that's probably a good move.
Right. And now I do I have the man bun thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a samurai.
Sweet.
Because I am. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point I own that more than the Japanese do.
Yeah.
And also it is my culture being an original hipster who still holds to hipsterism, even though it's no longer fashionable, making me the most hipster.
Aren't you more of a Ronin or Ronin, however you say it?
I'm a Ronin hipster.
Okay.
I ride my giant wheeled bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
For no master.
Sure.
For only my own. For the great heaven.
Yeah. There you go.
As it were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the Zen master said. He said, "Write no story for people. Write it for the great sky."
Oh.
And that's what I do with my bicycle,
Mm-hmm.
my big giant bicycle and my flannel.
Yeah.
But I went, and so I hadn't had a haircut in like 2 years. You know,
Mm-hmm.
which is a long time for a lot of people. I think most people get a haircut more frequently than that.
Yep.
But it wasn't because I was really going for looking homeless. It was because I was. No one ever understands what I'm going for. Like I go to the haircut place,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you get, man cutter or lady cutter. They say, what do they ask you?
They say, what kind of haircut do you want?
Right. Exactly. And I would say something to the effect of, make it look like I should be wearing a puka shell necklace.
Yeah, they're not going to get that.
And they would stare at me blankly and then be all flustered.
Yeah, it's way too obscure.
And so, then I would try to modify it and say like, make it look like I am a youth pastor who spent too long on a mission trip in Colombia.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it, but, you know.
Right. But see, yeah. But why couldn't I ever find someone that would understand it that would also could cut hair? And the thing is, I finally did.
Oh.
I found a lady, and I said, make it look like I could wear a puka shell necklace. And she said, I don't think that's the look you're going for. That's how she answered me.
Mm-hmm.
I said, really? Do tell. And she said, I think you're going for more like cover band / yoga teacher.
Oh.
And I said, you know what? You're right.
This lady sounds really special.
Yeah, I said, you know what? You are exactly right. And so she did that. And it was perfect. And so it took a long time, though. She cut my hair for 2 hours.
Wow.
I know. I've never.
Well, you got a lot of it.
I do. So I don't know. Yeah, but I better keep using her because she's the only one that ever understood that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And she also had a dog with her that had 2 different eyes.
Okay.
You know, one is one color, one's the other color.
Yeah, those are cool.
And I always thought that was some sort of sign. You know, like a Dances with Wolves thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You know, Dances with Wolves, if you think about it, is the same movie as The Last Samurai. Except, I guess The Last Samurai is the same, because The Last Samurai came second.
I, in all honesty, have not seen either film.
Well, they are. Just one is Tom Cruise,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is the other guy. And one is Indians in America, and the other is Samurai in Japan.
Okay.
But it's the same movie. They're both good movies, I think. Both of them are about how ultimately the best indigenous people is the white man that converts to it.
Oh, I have seen Dances with Wolves.
Right.
And he gets the Indian wife, and they burn his house down, and that was a good movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie because the ultimate truth of both movies is that white people who appropriate other cultures do it the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
just like men that become women are better women than women are, which is why we give them Woman of the Year. The ultimate story of the last 10 years of culture is that whatever white men do is better than whoever was doing it.
Well, look what we did for pizza.
Thank you. I mean, Italians, not white, by the way. Italians do not do pizza well. They just don't do pizza.
It's true.
I mean, if you've been to Italy and had a pizza, it's awful. And actually, frankly, in a lot of New York, it's not good. But Chicago's pretty good.
Yeah.
See. So that's the message, and I felt that was the vibe I got from this lady and her two-tone dog. So I'm gonna keep going to her. So that was a big advancement in my life, is finding someone that can cut hair that understood what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So that's been good.
Glad
I
to
felt
hear
like yes. But how is your corpus callosum?
Feels good so far. Still early in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is corpus callosum?
That's
for our friends.
That's like the lower bit of your brain, right? Or the middle bit.
It's the middle bit. It's the middle bit of your brain that connects your two hemispheres.
There
together.
we go. Yep.
And I was thinking about corpus callosum recently, and this is not a full thought because today's a day for half thoughts, because you're going to teach us how to survive in the soon-to-be nuclear apocalypse. For all the people that have not listened to you thus far and planted a garden or done anything to as wheat prices surge and they cannot afford bread, they will say, why didn't I listen to Smokestack and actually do something?
Yeah, it was dumb.
And you're saying you should have already, but if you haven't, here's one last path so that you don't starve to death that they still will ignore.
Yeah.
They will still ignore it, and then when they die, they'll say, he was right.
And that'll bring me a lot of satisfaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then we have an interview. We have our first interview on this show with someone that has a Wikipedia article, which I feel is a monument of some kind.
Moving up in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, soon we'll have someone that someone's heard of. And that'll be nice.
Yeah.
But we're going to have an interview with Ron Dart, who has a Wikipedia article, but I'm almost sure you've not heard of him. But he's a gentle soul and someone that I've learned from over the years. And I got him on because I recently learned that two big influences on me, Rupert Sheldrake, who we've talked about on the show, and also C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
We're both very, very good friends. In fact, one might say best friends, with a third guy who started a Christian ashram in India named Father Bede. and that Ron Dart was actually in communication with Father Bede and wrote a book about the friendship between Father Bede and C.S. Lewis. And arguably, in fact, from their letters, C.S. Lewis indicates that Bede is his best friend in the whole world, more than Tolkien. But no one ever knows about this guy. And he dedicated his book Surprised by Joy to Father Bede. And Father Bede came all the way from India to be with him in his last months when Lewis was dying.
Wow.
And so Bede really and Bede was a student of Lewis's. He was slightly younger. And so this guy has really had a big impact on my life. I didn't realize it. And so I wanted to explore who this fellow was and what they were about. Because he arguably is... Lewis said that Bede was his chief companion on his conversion to Christianity. And then Rupert Sheldrake also came back to religion from Father Bede. So without Father Bede, arguably two of the largest influences on my life would not have ever converted.
Wow.
So I decided to explore this fellow, and Ron Dart is a Canadian. He agreed to do the show, I think, before he listened to the show.
Yeah, that's how we get him.
Yeah, you got to get him. So he was I detected like a hint of nervousness, maybe, because he may have listened to a bit of the show and heard me screaming about how astronauts don't wear diapers.
Right. Well, he can disavow us. That's fine. We won't.
Yeah, that's fine. And maybe not. He may not have listened to the show at all. I may just be paranoid, which is valid. He may not have listened at all. He may not care at all. But he's a scholar in the old way of being a scholar. Like, I feel like we are scholars in the new way of being scholars, which is where anything that someone puts in print, you go, no.
Yeah.
Right?
We're postmodern scholars.
Well, I think we're even postmodern.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate.
I think that's more accurate because we deconstruct their deconstruction.
So postmodern scholars make stuff up. Postmodern scholars scoff at it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then, but he but nonetheless, he's very knowledgeable in the old way of being a scholar, and knows a lot about Lewis and Bede and the Inklings and all that stuff. So I asked him about some of that stuff, and it was good. He's also a mountaineer.
Sweet.
So it's fun to talk about. He still does mountaineering, even though he's in his 70s now, which is interesting.
Awesome.
But so we'll do that. But my first half thought is this: I want to talk about the corpus callosum and an Apple TV show called Severance.
Ooh, okay.
Are you familiar with the show Severance?
No, but is it about craniotomies or something?
Well, yes, but also no.
Ooh.
I don't think most people realize that is the connection. But so, well, first of all, your corpus callosum is this weird thing, right? You have two. Well, first of all, do you ever talk to yourself?
Sometimes.
You go, smokestack, what should we do right now? Or something like that.
Yeah, it's usually if I've done something stupid, and I say something like, "That was stupid, you big dummy." That's usually
right.
That's usually
right. Is it possible that is one of your consciousnesses arguing with the other part of your another consciousness?
Is it possible? Yes, it's probably possible.
Because I think there's strong evidence that that people have at least two consciousnesses in their heads.
Is this an ego-id sort of division, or is this something else?
This is something else.
Yeah.
This is like because you have two hemispheres of your brain, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Right and left. And they're only physically connected by the corpus callosum.
Okay.
Which is this long, thick, sort of organic wire thing that connects the two.
Mm-hmm.
But, some people that have seizures, very bad seizures, the cure is to sever the corpus callosum so that the hemispheres are no longer connected.
Okay.
And, interestingly, they go on to live fairly normal lives. So you would think, like, well, that's a bit weird. You cut your brain in half, and it doesn't do very much.
Yeah, I mean, that is weird.
It's strange.
Not what I would expect.
Now, there are some notable problems. For example, and I'm not going to get this exactly right because it's been a while since I looked at the specifics, but this is in general correct. One hemisphere of your brain is connected more to your visual inputs.
Yep.
And another is to your auditory. And then one of those that's connected to your visual is connected to either your mouth or your hands. I forget which one. And the other one's connected to the other one. So just for the sake of argument, let's say it's eyes and hands. I think this is true.
Mm-hmm.
And mouth and ears. That makes sense, right? That they would be connected because you have hand-eye coordination and also ear-mouth coordination. So that makes sense. Okay. So if you take someone that has had this surgery to separate their brain halves and you say, look, I'm going to write on a piece of paper a word, let's say, or I'm going to show you a picture of something.
Mm-hmm.
And and I want you to tell me what it is. And you hold up like a picture of an orange. You say, "What is this?" All of them will go, "I don't know." Like, you don't know what it is? Like, no. And they don't seem that upset about it. They're just like, "I'm not sure." Then you say, "Can you write down what you think it is?" And you give them a pen and they'll write orange on a piece of paper.
Oh, freaky deaky. Whoa.
Right.
Yeah.
Because their eyes can still communicate with their hands, but their mouth doesn't get the input from the eyes.
That's weird that they would answer "I don't know" instead of just being unable to speak the word.
Exactly. And some of them, some of them, they lose what that's called the ability to automatic speaking.
Okay.
Or speaking spontaneously.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like one consciousness in their brain cannot get to their mouth, but knows what it's looking at.
Oh.
But can express it through the hands. But the other consciousness cannot see it because it doesn't have eyes. But it's still like hearing the stuff coming in and is able to speak.
Whoa. So the longer one lives after having this surgery, the two parts of their brain have different knowledge bases and can't share them with each other. And that knowledge is only accessible via certain means.
Right.
But not others.
So it's strange because as long as they are going about the world, this doesn't present too much. Like, you can drive a car and your eyes, your consciousness that sees with your eyes can use your hands to avoid obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
And the others, this is probably why you can drive and listen to a podcast like this wonderful podcast now, because the consciousness that is listening to the podcast is a different consciousness than the one that is driving the car.
And
right?
And they just communicate with each other as needed.
As needed, correct. So this is why some things are like, this is why listening to a podcast but also carrying on a conversation is almost impossible.
Right.
Because that's the same consciousness.
So you can do
right.
two things at the same time because one is handled by one half of your brain and the other is handled by the other half. And if one distracts the other, it's because for some reason the one half has required the resources of the other half. Correct.
But so it's fascinating that you can sever this connection between the halves, and yet they still operate. They appear to have two separate consciousnesses going on in the head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because one is fully capable of its own things, and the other, but they can't talk. And so this has always been I think that's a hint of how reality works, because existence is relationship. Like I've talked about that once long ago, but like if you had a single ball out in space, is it moving? Is it not moving? What's it doing? Where is it? You can't tell.
Yeah.
But as soon as you have two, now you can, relative to one another, you can define motion, you can define growth, you can define, so you need, I think this is like the Taoist idea that you have to have, that the one must manifest as two polarities, which is probably why Christianity has always insisted on the Trinity, because you can't have, if you have one thing, like, and this is how I argue with Muslim people about God. They'll be like, God is one. Like, yes, God is one, but one must be expressed in at least two, maybe three. And I suspect if we learn more, we'll find that we have three sorts of consciousnesses somehow.
Okay. Yeah.
In the one person. So you're actually, you yourself are a mirror of the divine, and that you're multiples in one. But I believe one of the purposes of the evil world of Babylon, as the Rastas would say, is to try and separate you into your halves, and to keep you from being whole, and that ultimately is sort of what hell is when you are, and they do it. So the TV show Severance. Here's the basic premise. It's a new show. I think it's only got 3 episodes out now or something. It's on Apple TV. Matt from Quantum was talking about it, and I agree with him that it's got 4 episodes out, that there's no reason to watch the show as it is slow and not very good.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely not worth getting Apple TV for. But it has as its central premise an interesting idea. So the idea is that there are these people at this corporation who volunteer for a brain procedure. And the brain procedure puts a chip inside your brain so that when you're at work, you completely forget everything outside of work. Like, you have no memory of what your name is outside of work, if you have a family or not, where you live, they're all inside this office room, so like what state they're even in is not, they don't know none of it. They don't know what they did last night, anything. But the minute they walk out the door at 5:00, the chip switches and they have full knowledge and memory of who they are outside and no knowledge whatsoever of work or anything that happened.
Oh, man. Okay.
Right. And so this is all these people have volunteered for this because it appears on the surface to many people to be an attractive option. Because they're like, well, I don't take my work home with me. I can't. I don't answer any emails. I don't have any stress about it. Right? There's nothing I never even really know what's happening. You know? Does this sound attractive to you?
No. Kill it.
Me
Kill
neither.
It with fire.
Me neither. But a lot of people, I think, would initially be attracted by this deal. Because there's been movies made in this vein in the past. Like there was the one with Adam Sandler where he had a remote control and he could fast forward through the boring parts of his life. Mm-hmm. I think it was called Click or something.
Yeah.
It's a similar idea, right? But, okay. But, as it happens in the show, what you realize is that, and it's pretty obvious if you think about it for 5 seconds before signing up for a brain chip procedure, which most people would not do in real life, right? They would not. We've seen that. They will sign up for anything that is pushed as good. Just because. That the person they become 2 different people. 2 different entities because one never has knowledge of the other one.
Interesting. Okay.
And so like from the perspective of the one inside the work, he goes to leave at 5:00. He opens the door and the next thing he knows, he's walking back in the door. So he never leaves. He's just always there.
Right.
He's always awake. He's always there. He's like, he never sleeps. He never has anything outside. He doesn't know who he is, right? And from the one on the outside, it's the same thing. He goes into work, but then he just opens the door, and the next thing he knows, he's walking back out. And so you think that it's you, but it isn't, because the one at work is like, well, I'm not having fun outside of work. I'm trapped here forever. And the other person never does anything that is, not like hanging out.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is sort of what modern work culture is actually going for. Like, that's what they try to accomplish. They just don't have a brain chip yet. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people, if they don't feel that way, they certainly are forced to act that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, leave home at the door.
Right.
And I believe that is the source of a lot of discontentment but they're trying to separate this idea that the world is trying to separate you into 2, to keep you from being a whole person and separate you into 2 halves, is I think true and the source of a lot of discontentment. And also maybe on a spiritual level, what is trying to keep you from being your completely divine self by preventing the complete union of all sides of you.
Right.
Which is what we're trying to get to. But that's just a small thought. I haven't developed that very much. Do you have any thoughts on corpus callosum before we talk about how to plant your victory garden?
Well, I think you're onto something about work culture and the disintegrated personality that it creates. I
basically
I've
Freud.
met people that suffer from
integration.
This. Yeah.
I see myself as a successor to Carl Jung. I think that's fair.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think he ever thought about that. I think he was sort of a normie in that way. Okay, so our listeners can carry that forward because we don't have time to explore it today, and I haven't thought about it fully. But I wanted to bring that up as just a sort of imagining of what's really going on here, and especially in our brains. But also though, think about this: the fact that you can still operate as a mostly normal human being with some quirks. I have to imagine that actually that the two halves of the brain are communicating in some way beyond physical then. If they can be separate and you don't just like completely become dysfunctional.
Yeah.
There must be some level on which they communicate that isn't just a neuron. Maybe that's through the body itself. You know, maybe that's through, because I mean, I guess at some level, the one hemisphere is connected down through neurons to your body, and the other is connected down through neurons to your body, and at some level those would touch, just not in the head. But they must be communicating in a way hitherto not understood. Maybe a non-physical way.
I've been long convinced that there's the brain mind thing is incomplete without consideration that there is sort of a spiritual dimension to the brain as an organ itself, and probably some sort of coincident spiritual organ with the brain that we cannot perceive with our limited ability.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that I hinted at this in a recent Gum Road. I think that what you're describing may be the EMF fields of the brain, like that may be the non-physical portion of that may be the mind, how the mind interfaces with the brain.
And I think that would be a very, I'm blanking on dude's name. The guy we talked about when we were talking about Lewis, his other influence.
Sheldrake.
Sheldrake. That's a very Sheldrakean sort of concept, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, but so the world is headed for World War III, allegedly, again.
Yep.
And the Ukraine is still not doing great. Putin has the Infinity Gauntlet and the Death Eaters.
Yep.
And Ukraine Awards is being defended by Jedis and Spider-Man. But it's not enough because he can still snap his fingers.
Yep.
So, what if the situation spirals out of control because people scream "no fly zone" enough to where people feel pressured to do it, even though no one understands that would mean shooting down Russian jets and causing a direct conflict. And also that if they were to do that, people seem to imagine that it would just be fighting Russia and that China wouldn't instantly jump on board and also fight with Russia, which I don't understand why people don't realize that.
Yeah.
Why do people not understand that was what, like, people, they really do think it would be like Iraq again, where it would be like, and they would just, but no, like if you were to fight Russia, China would also get involved, and it would India, and would Iran, and it would be a whole thing.
Well, I think most normie Americans have no concept of the different abilities to project military power between Afghanistan and China, or Russia for that matter.
Yeah.
Like their scale isn't big enough for how different the power levels are of those countries.
Yeah, and I think that's why the propaganda has been so dangerous, because they keep saying Putin's being humiliated, he's got a safe face. Like,
right.
No, he's not. He's been doing fine.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? He's taken the country in pretty quick time. Like, he's surrounded Kiev now, allegedly, according to reports.
Well, the trains are still running in and out as of the 5th anyway. I saw an interesting write-up on that. Some guy like traveled there and took the train to Kiev and walked around Kiev and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, because he's been taking it without murdering all the civilians. This is our MO.
Right.
Where when America takes Iraq, they bomb the hell out of everything and let everyone die, and then they march in, and it still takes them a month.
Yeah.
And what Russia is doing is largely not attacking anything civilian at all.
Yeah.
The electricity's still on.
Well,
I mean, they have the power plants. They could disconnect them, but they have not.
I think it's still an open question as to whether all of Russia's objectives are going to be completed in Ukraine, but I don't think it's up for debate by any serious person that so far they've been proceeding at a very quick pace.
They've been proceeding at a quick pace, but also at a pace where they appear to be pretty concerned with civilian casualties.
Thus far, I don't know if that's going to last, because I think part of it in the beginning they wanted to see if they could convince Ukrainian military people to defect. And
yes, I agree. I think they were trying to get them. I think thus far they've been trying to persuade.
Yeah, and if they give up on that, if they realize it's not working and they give up on that, then you'll see the levels of violence probably increase.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good prediction, because but anyway, normie people don't they think that we could just attack Russia and then China would have to get involved because Russia's their biggest help against us.
Yeah.
And if we took out Russia, then they would be alone against basically the Western power, and they'd have to.
Well,
and then also India would too, and it would be this whole giant thing. I don't understand what people are talking about, but let's say that does happen.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for the people that have been lazy and have not started their garden or have garage rabbits like I never did?
Well, so this is the good intro to a 2-part series, maybe even 3-part series that we're going to do on surviving World War III. And I'm talking
because I think most of us would like to survive World War III.
Yeah, it's a good goal. Everybody should go for that. I don't really buy it when people say they're gonna just have their little Alamo moment and go out in a blaze of glory. No, everybody wants to live. So but you have to take serious.
And also, in most cases, it would be really stupid.
Yes.
Let's say China's rolling across Iowa.
Yeah.
What are you gonna? You're gonna yeah,
you're just gonna run at them,
and you go ping at a tank with your. It doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Do anything.
Let's be realistic. Nobody's gonna. Okay. Anyway, that's a different rant. But I think we're gonna do maybe a multi-part series on survival, and we're calling this World War III Supply Chain Collapse Survival Prep for Slacker Dum-Dums. And so this is
good. That's a good name.
This is for those of you that have done nothing or very little, and now feel like I'd better get engaged. And the first, because depending on your station in life and where you live, your strategies are going to be vastly different. And so we're going to address them. First, we're going to talk to the urbanite. Okay.
Ooh,
so let's define urbanite. Well, no, they're not evil. They're dumb because, well, we'll get into that. But they've made some mistakes. They've made some questionable life choices. But I still want them to live. And I know that there's some in our audience, and you're about to be castigated for your foolishness, but I still want you to live. So here's some advice for you. So first we're going to define urbanite. You live in a densely populated city, and the resources for you and the people that live around you are brought into that city from outside it. You don't have access to land where you can grow your own food. You probably don't have any productive capacity within your household. So you're primarily a consumer. You go to work, you get a paycheck, you spend paycheck. You're not capable or interested in making things. And you probably can't in your tiny apartment. And then you don't have family or community connections with your nearest neighbors. There's just people all around you. The people you have relationships with are either online or through some other thing that you're a part of that you have to commute to, sometimes long commutes. There's no physical community. And then your material needs and your paycheck all come from giant corporations. There's not some farmer somewhere where you can go buy your meat like we can out in the boonies. So that's your situation. Mm-hmm. All right. So, I understand why some of you feel like you're stuck in the city and can't leave. And you're unprepared and you see this thing coming. I understand why you're there. There's somebody you can't leave behind. There's a relationship. There's a relative you're taking care of. Some of you have a good reason for being in the city, and I respect that. Others of you are there for the money and the international dining choices, and I don't feel sorry for you.
At what point in World War III do you abandon your elderly relatives in the nursing home and just say, look?
Well, I'm gonna say never. You never abandon them.
Okay, you never. You just put them on the wagon, in the back of the station wagon. You run away.
If you got to throw them in a wheelbarrow, that's what you got to do. That's okay. These are. I'm going through my starting assumptions. So survival for you is going to look completely different than survival for a rural person
wait.
Yeah.
What? At what point do you become a Ukrainian and actually eat your own children?
Oh no, dude. Are you?
Because that's how they handled the last crisis.
Yeah.
And Putin mocked them for this.
He did take a shot at them over that.
Yeah, because they deserve it, because the Ukrainians are disgusting people. And I'm not defending Russia in this conflict. I'm just saying the Ukrainians.
It's perfectly okay to be disgusted with both sides.
Well, I don't know that I'm disgusted with both sides.
Uh-huh.
I know I'm not disgusted with Russia. I don't know that what they're doing is correct.
Right.
But it's like normal. Invading another country is pretty normal historically. But the Ukrainians with Holodomor, I mean, they're just
So, just starved to death. How could you eat? Did they really? Yeah, did they really eat their babies? I mean,
that's what they say, and they frame it as a.
It's like it was so bad what the Soviets did to us. It's like, yeah, it was, but you still didn't have to eat your baby.
Right, and so every time I see a Ukraine, I go, ugh.
That is a basket case country.
Someone says I'm a Ukrainian, I go, ugh. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah. Yeah, so let's keep that in mind as we discuss the Ukrainians, because they are baby eaters. They're cannibals.
We're never going to get through this segment at this rate.
I'm sorry. Okay, continue.
Survival for urbanite is going to be completely different for a rural or suburban person, so we're going to address them separately. Now, one more caveat. If you have family or friends in a rural or suburban area that will take you in when it comes time to leave, and we'll go over when it comes time to leave, what that looks like, all your planning needs to be focused on that. That is a way better option than what we're about to go into now. There are no good options for the urban survivalist. This is all bad news. So if you have a buddy or an aunt that lives out in the country, your plans need to focus on getting to her, and the stuff we're going to go over will also be helpful in that end, but that's not going to be my starting assumptions are you live in the city and you're stuck living in the city. You don't have anywhere to go. And the good news is that you're going to be the city dwellers are going to be the last people to suffer austerity and deprivations and collapse of the supply chain, because like the human body, when it's suffering blood loss, it's going to redirect blood to the brain and the heart and away from the extremities, right? And so you live in a critical place to the larger society, government power structures and all that. And so you'll be one of the last ones to suffer. The bad news is that you will quickly trade all of your personal dignity and liberty for safety and calories. That will happen early on. As soon as rationing sets in, as soon as you have to be interacting with government distributed resources in order to live, your Second Amendment rights are going to be taken away. You're going to be forced to take injections. You're going to have to scan your ID. I mean, it's going to be full control. Like, your rights are gone. You won't have any. And then more bad news. If the city does start to actually collapse and the food stops coming in, you're going to be caught in the middle of a World War Z type situation, but there's no helicopter coming to pick you up. So it's okay in the beginning, but it gets really bad. So your goal, what's your goal here? Cities are networks and nodes for resources and labor distribution. You can't survive very long if your node fails, okay? If your node fails, you need to get on another functional node before the chaos overtakes you. That's your goal. Your node,
Okay,
your
so I have to-
node's
yeah,
failed.
okay.
You got to get to another node somehow. You cannot stay in a dead node. So you have to think of cities. This cities and civilization is a network, right? And if you think about an IT situation, a server farm or whatever, if one of those servers fails, resources are redistributed to other servers, right? And
So you're saying if the corpus callosum of the network of distribution of the nation is set, you have to get to the other side. See how it all makes sense?
Yes. You've got to get on a new node.
Yeah.
So this is going to happen. This situation is going to happen in phases. The first phase of it, we're going to call controlled austerity. In this phase, the government and corporation complex keeps your node supplied with goods, but there will be shortages you have to deal with. And so the way you prep for this is not complicated. You need to hoard up rice, beans, water, canned goods, and other essentials to last you through supply interruptions, because it's not going to flow perfectly. You're going to survive, but there are things you can do that are pretty obvious that will help smooth that over. Learn how to repair things, learn home economics, learn how to cook using basic ingredients. Thrift is key in this phase 1 of controlled austerity. Practice weekly by experimenting with meals based on dried grains, beans, butter, flour, things that would come in your war ration kit. A lot of that is going to be dried grain based. So go ahead and start learning to cook with those to make something palatable out of it. Now, also during this phase and in wartime, there is going to be intelligence, counterintelligence, and espionage operations going on all around, especially in cities, because cities are important. They've got all the infrastructure in them. They keep the war machine going. So you are living very close to targets of both military and intelligence attack. So in this time, you need to keep your incorrect opinions to yourself and be wary of strangers. Now, phase 2. This is where it gets hairy. Node failure. In this phase, resources and energy have failed in your node because of enemy action or reallocation of scarce resources. So it might be the government just decides to cut your city off because somewhere else is more important to them. Or it could be because the supply lines are actually cut by some sort of attack. Unlike suburban or rural areas, human life cannot be sustained via local efforts and natural resources. You are now a refugee. Your goal is to get on a good node. Get to a node as fast as you can. So, to prep for this, you need to be training cardio, carrying weight, and some kind of a fighting discipline. Robbery and rape are your main threats. We're not going to talk about nukes.
Say robbery and rape?
Yeah. Like
Okay.
uncontrolled chaos, scared people, and people taking advantage of it. So robbery and rape, that sort of thing. Those are the main threats you need to worry about. If nukes are real and one goes off in your city, I mean, you can learn about nuke survival somewhere else. I feel like that ground has been tread pretty well.
Yeah, we did shows about it.
So we're gonna skip over like radiation and all that stuff. We're talking about dealing with other humans and the other dangers that I feel like often get kind of left out of this scenario. So whether or not your city is nuked, you're gonna have to be dealing with these things more than you're gonna have to be dealing with radiation, probably. Now, if you have a car, you need to stash some extra fuel in durable, leak-proof containers, along with tire repair kit and some other items needed to make expedient repairs. Also, a hose for siphoning gas. You need to be able to keep your car running. That's a very valuable resource, and it may be taken from you at some point, but as long as you've got it, make sure you can keep it running. So, like those military-style jerry cans you can get online, those are great. I've got a bunch of those. Keep them in the trunk of your car. They don't leak. Just make sure you buy the nozzle. Now, you're also going to need a crew of trustworthy people. If you don't have that, if you don't have at least 2 or 3 other people that you know that you guys can work together, you're going to have bad time. Like, this is not a good time to be alone. So you need to find some relationships, and you guys need to at least talk about this and agree we're going to meet up and we're going to stick together to try to overcome this. You're going to need a team. Now, part of that is you're going to have to find out where the FEMA camps are. Here's the thing about me and Alex Jones disagree about the FEMA camps. FEMA camps nobody's going to be rounded up and arrested and put in a FEMA camp. FEMA camps are going to open the doors, and urbanites are going to rush into them. They will be trampling each other to get there because that's where the food is.
Oh, that's what I said before. People get on the trains voluntarily.
Yes.
They always go to the concentration, and I know Jews are like, meh, because they've been taught to be reflexive about anything about Auschwitz, even though none of them went to Auschwitz that are like living today. And for someone that's really old, they've been just like black people have been taught to reflexively scream things about slavery, even though they don't know what historical slavery was. But in fact, you did get on the trains to go to Auschwitz voluntarily. Now, it didn't seem voluntarily because it was like, well, I have to go there or I won't have food. But no one held a gun to them and rounded them
right.
up.
And
that's mostly fiction. That happened maybe a tiny bit somewhere.
Most urbanites, when this situation happens, will go to the FEMA camps voluntarily.
And they will deserve it.
And you don't have to go. If you're prepared, right. you can exist outside for at least for a while. And I don't know what horrors or just mundane life awaits in FEMA camps. I don't know if they're going to turn into some nightmare. I mean, usually there's in any sort of refugee camp, there's going to be crime and rape going on. I mean, look at the Astrodome after Hurricane Katrina. If you want to learn about what a FEMA camp is going to be like, it's not going to be a fun place.
And that's the same thing with the camps in Germany and frankly the camps in the United States, because we put not only the Japanese into camps but also the Germans. Is that usually they are not opened with the intent on it becoming a death camp.
Yeah.
Usually they're opened with the intent on keeping people there who are for some reason unable to be out on their own. They don't have the food, they don't have the whatever, or they are deemed not good for society in some way and they need to be put here till they go somewhere else. Yep. Most of the time, including in the German case, it was not intended when they were built, or they have COVID and they need to go here. It was not intended to be built to kill people. But what happens is that's always part of, when you start doing that, civilization is already spiraling. Yeah. And so you go to this place and you're in there, and if you happen to be an unlucky person that's there in the final stages of the spiral, food stops coming, everything stops coming, and it becomes a giant starvation, death camp violence. It's not a good place to be. It's fine. It's usually like the people put in the Japanese internment camps or the German ones in the U.S. were released. Yeah, and they were fed and they played.
It's because we won, But if we lose,
we won. Had we been losing, if the Germans were here, when we were doing, there would have been Japanese death camps.
Yeah,
because we wouldn't have wanted to let them out because they might go help the Japanese. But also, we don't have food anymore, and the food we do have needs to go to our soldiers and the civilians, not to the people in the camp. So, see how it works. Yeah. And that's how this will work also, if it get that bad. Right. Okay. Continue.
So, you don't have to go to the FEMA camp. You can try to go make it out on your own, but you're going to need some stuff. Whether or not you have a car, you need to get all this gear if you want a shot at getting to another node and not having to go to the FEMA camp. You need to be mobile, on your feet, with the basics of survival. At minimum, you need a sturdy backpack, okay? Now, this thing should have lots of complicated pockets because you're going to want to hide stuff in there. One of the things you're going to face, you can have guns and tomahawks and all kind of weapons to defend yourself against robbery, but if you enter into any government facility to get food or shelter, you will be searched and your weapons will be taken from you. Okay? So if you want to hang on to those weapons, you're going to have to be self-sustaining. You're going to have to scavenge. You're going to have to break into buildings. You're going to have to be able to do a lot of stuff if you want to maintain the ability to protect yourself. Nobody in the Astrodome was allowed to take weapons in, right? In New Orleans, they were confiscating people's weapons all over the place because they don't want anybody to be armed. They don't care if they're taking away your ability to defend yourself. Their only concern is how do we keep this from spiraling out of control from a society management standpoint. And That's why, I mean, it's the same idea that most cops, even though that they think they would say that they're defending people's liberty and freedom by doing the job of being a cop, they're also pro-gun control, because that sort of thinking eventually overtakes. And if they choose order or freedom, if they choose between order and freedom, they're going to choose order. And the choose order impulse will be in full effect. So keep that in mind. Now, you're going to need a sturdy backpack capable of hiding contraband. You can modify it and put some secret pockets in there, but you need to be able to hide things that would otherwise be confiscated if your bag was searched. Hiking shoes appropriate to the climate and extra socks. You're going to be walking way more than you've ever walked in your life with weight, okay? Unless you're a regular backpacker, this is going to be a huge adjustment for you. So you need to make sure you've got some good shoes. Merrell boots are great. They're easy to break in. They're not going to tear your feet up like a stiffer boot will. Their Moab series of boots is I can't say enough good things about them, especially if they're brand new and you're out there in the first time. Get some good hiking socks. You'll be in good shape, but you do need to. Ideally, you've been training. You also need layers of clothing that you can shed or take on and off depending on the conditions if you get stuck outside somewhere. And again, if you're in a government shelter, you've been searched and your weapons have been taken away. So if it's important to you, you need to have a way of protecting yourself from exposure. Look at what's going on. Watch the stuff from Ukraine. All these people are lined up. They're moving on feet. They're waiting for transportation outside. These people are not. They're outside a lot and they're walking a lot. This will be you too in this situation.
Can I recommend a book called "Fixing Your Feet" by John Von Hoff?
Wow, that sounds handy.
It's an entire book just about like dealing with blisters from having to walk or run too much.
Dude,
like keeping or hiking a lot. Mm-hmm. Like he hiked a lot of like the Appalachian Trail and stuff, and it's just a book about fixing your feet.
Like, I don't want to
get that book. That is super, super important if you have to walk a lot. Your feet will become destroyed.
True.
If you haven't done this, like you will be, after the first couple of days, especially if your feet get wet, you're going to have real problems walking.
Yeah. If you
like you don't, people don't anticipate that.
Absolutely. Your feet will get destroyed and you're down. Absolutely. So you got to keep your feet dry.
This book, actually. That would be one of my main things of your survival kit is this book, Fixing Your Feet.
Yeah, I'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But that is a huge deal, and we could probably do a whole segment on just how to care for your feet, but you can research that elsewhere because I want to keep moving through this. But that might be the most important thing in this list. Some means to protect yourself that you can realistically use. Don't go buy a gun if you're not going to train with it. That's just a liability for you. You'd be better off if you can't train with a gun. You'd be better off just carrying a pipe or some kind of blunt weapon to strike with, because everybody knows how to strike with a blunt object, right? Yeah. But whatever you decide to use, you really need to train with it. You need to carry at least 2 liters of water in hard bottles and have purification tablets. That's another thing they're dealing with in Ukraine right now, is this lack of clean water. All these people are displaced from these cities that have been taken over. They're out on the road. There's no access to clean water. So if you can just get some ditch water and throw some purification tablets in it and drink it, you're going to be a lot better off than somebody who's is out on the road and now has dysentery or some other waterborne disease because they didn't have the ability to purify their water. You'll need expedient rations. You're not packing food to survive on all the time. You're packing enough calories to give you energy to walk from one node to another, or at least get to some transportation somehow. So that's like, energy dense Cliff Bars and stuff like that. Something with protein and fat in it and sugar, just like raw energy to get you over the hump till you can get to a functioning node. Here's another thing that gets overlooked is you need tools to make entry or exit of locked buildings. The methods you want to focus on are cutting, prying, shimming, and picking. And you'll have to practice, especially with picking. It does take practice, but anybody can learn it. But you may find yourself in the situation where you're locked in somewhere, like a FEMA camp, and you really want to get out, and you'd be doing a lot better had you hid a hacksaw blade in your backpack and got it into the camp. Like you might be able to get out that way. So you need to think about that is if you get in a situation you now regret, have those tools. And of course, you can look up basic survival bug out bag type tools, Swiss Army knife, flashlight, Bic lighters. Bic lighters will be worth their weight in gold in this scenario. And guess what? You've got to sleep. So if you can carry a bedroll of some kind with you, you might be able to find some shelter from rain and stuff, but if you have a sleeping bag and a bivy sack to go around it that's waterproof, you're going to be a lot happier because you might have to sleep rough on your way out there. So if you have all those things and you even just do a little bit of familiarity practice with them, and you have that bag in your car all the time, that would make a world of difference to somebody like that's fleeing a city in Ukraine right now if they had that backpack on their back. And I'm sure there are a few that did plan this, and they are doing worlds better. And we're not talking about communication gadgets. We're not talking about a lot of electronics. We're not talking about, getting on the internet or all that. All that crap will be useless to you in this situation. This is highly physical situation that you're dealing with. And at that point, you have those things. You'll be able to get to some kind of transportation, get to another node where there's food, and you're just going to keep doing that. Now, if you got tactical Timmy dreams of going to the suburbs and like raiding houses, because I know some people think this way. City dwellers just think, oh, well, I'll just buy guns and then I'll go marauding. You will get absolutely wrecked the first house you come to. Suburban people have thought about this, and they will kill you like really quickly. If this stuff goes down, if a city drops off the grid, every house in the suburbs is going to have a highly caffeinated and very aggressive dude with a gun waiting at the top of the stairs for you. Just don't.
There's going to be a lot of people during the collapse just waiting for someone to come in the door. But they've wanted their whole
They've
lives.
been dreaming of this moment.
It's for someone to come in and so they can shoot them.
So don't think you're going to go out there and raid houses for food. That is stupid. It will get you. It not only is it immoral, it's stupid, and it will get you killed. If you're an urbanite, you've put yourself in this situation for the great food choices. You're still expected to be honorable about how you survive it. So that means just get to another node or get to a relative's house. So that's part one of our survival lecture. I'll put these notes. I know there was a lot of lists in particular, so I'm going to put the notes and link to the Fixing Your Feet book up on the show page.
Good, yeah. And if anyone in Ukraine is out there running away from experiencing this, if there are any Ukrainians out there doing that, then please come on the show.
Let us know.
I will be disgusted by you because of your tendency to eat.
I don't think they'll be listening to podcasts, but you never know.
Oh, I bet they are. They're like running around. It's one of those things where they're like pretend. They're like they're mostly fine. Mm-hmm. They've still got internet, but they're like, oh, I'm living through historical circumstances.
Yeah, I mean there are
you see
a lot of people that are just
even people being invaded,
wrapping themselves up in the drama, but really haven't experienced anything. Just like COVID.
Like we're fine. What's wrong with you? This isn't the road. You haven't left your room. Like I carry the fire. Anyway. So I guess that was good. I don't to be honest, I think a lot of our listeners are just gonna die.
Well, hopefully not.
And then it will be annoying because we'll have to get a whole new crop of listeners after World War III.
Yeah.
Like, I want you guys to survive mostly out of selfish reasons because I don't want to have to rebuild a listener base.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
If you guys all die, and then we have to do this again, It's so annoying. Eh, I mean, maybe more people would listen though, and it would be easier after World War III.
Well, maybe if we like,
is World War III good or bad for the show? That's the main.
It could
question.
be good. You know, we've had a lot of good takes. You know, this past 10 episodes or so that have come true. So maybe we'll establish our credibility on the backs of millions of dead.
I mean, is that not a price worth paying?
Well, if they're gonna die anyway,
for the content,
you know, might as well.
Yeah. So I think it's gonna be good. But I want you guys to survive just so that you can keep listening. And like, I mean, we would lose Gumroad subscribers if you died. It would just be a thing. So try not to die for our own selfish.
Yeah.
But I think most of you will, because if you listened to Smokestack for this long and it's still not planted.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not going to make it in GMI, as the kids say. Should we
do the gardening, how to start a garden right now? Should we do that now, or we wait till next week?
No. Show will be too long.
I do have a little mailbag.
The interview with the fellas about
an hour. Okay. All right. Well, let's do a little mailbag and then we'll jump into your interview. How about that?
All right. Hit me with some mailbag.
Well, first off, we got an email from 2Cycle, who wants to present for the audience's consideration his taxonomy and gradients of male human strength. And the gradients have nothing to do with how much you've exercised or worked out. So, abstract. Strength exists in naturally occurring gradients, although not critically examinable by the science, peace be upon him. For the sake of this thought experiment, naturally occurring strengths are only considered and not that of bodybuilders and powerlifters and other specialized weirdos. So, in fifth place, we're going to call this Dad Strong. Men develop the supernatural ability to carry immense loads after becoming a father. Observable at any beach where dads are seen carrying 6 chairs, 4 bags, 11 towels, 4 buckets, 5 shovels, 2 coolers, and an umbrella, etc. At fourth place, Old Man Strong. Now, I've been told by a listener of our show, friend of show, Albert Einstein, that I am Old Man Strong. Typically a combination of Dad Strong and liver experience, usually peaking at around age 65. A cursory search of old man knocking out some unsuspecting glib young punk reveals a near endless list of examples. Number 3, Country Boy Strong. Present at any feed or farm supply store. These men grab, lift, and move 50-pound bags of animal feed around like a normal person grabs a small bag of cat food. They perform the feat repeatedly throughout the day. On several occasions, I've observed 600 pounds, 12 bags of feed hand-loaded into a truck while having a conversation without even the slightest grunt or expression of exertion. This is colloquially known as, if he gets his hands on you, you ain't getting loose. The number 2 spot is Retard Strong. Biological reasons exist for this. Discuss on your own. And number 1 is Gorilla Strong, and gorilla was included because of the anatomical similarities. This isn't the strongest animal category. A gorilla can rip a human apart like an overcooked, slimy rotisserie chicken, joint from joint, limb from limb. If you aren't walking around every day terrified of the thought of being ripped apart by a gorilla, you are not paying attention. Thus ends the strength gradients for your consideration. I hope you at least attain to Old Man Strong, everybody in this audience.
That was 2-stroke?
That was from 2Cycle. I always call him 2-stroke, but it's actually 2Cycle. And then the Duke of Alba answered our Russian military question from a couple episodes ago. And he says, why we haven't seen the S-400 missile system in action, a theory by Duke of Alba. Well, the short answer is because the Russians don't need it in their fight against Ukraine. While it is true that the Ukrainian Air Force was able to fly some sorties against the Russians, it is not very much, and the damage that they caused was not really significant. Most of their Air Force got whacked on the tarmac early in the invasion, so what was left could mostly make token strikes. But why not use it anyway? Because Just outside of Yuki airspace, the U.S. is very likely flying certain electronic intelligence gathering platforms, waiting for the S-400 batteries to fill the skies with all the signals they generate. They would get a lot of intelligence on how the system operates this way, providing valuable information to develop countermeasures, whether electronic warfare or other. This system is one of Russia's main aces in the hole if they come to blows with the U.S. and NATO, so they will not expose it until then, in my opinion. I believe we haven't seen a number of their newest systems for the same reason. The Russians keep a lot of old gear on hand to arm lesser quality troops, and indeed that's who we've seen doing most of the fighting in the invasion. The best troops and the best gear are mostly sitting this one out. Le fin. So, thank you, Duke of Alba. I think that's a great answer, and it reveals a little bit about the long-term thinking of this Russian action.
Yes, and also, someone sent us a letter. I was too harsh on the NPC forum.
You were too.
I was too harsh on the
So they're
NPC.
not genocidal.
True. No, only Weave is.
Okay.
But he's there.
Okay.
And I associate it so much with Weave, and I know that's not fair.
He's apparently not the leader of the NPC forum, right?
He's not, but he just in my head when I think because he's the one that would always talk about it. But I understand that NPC is not Weave, and Weave is not NPC. Okay. So I did give it too much of a harshness. And I don't even dislike Weave. He's just a genocidal, crazy maniac. He's nice in his way. In his way, he's just mentally, I don't know, legitimately insane. So,
well, let it never be said that when we get it wrong, we don't correct ourselves on air.
That's right. Everyone go to the NPC forum.
Hello, guys over there.
So anyway, let's go into the interview with Ron Dart. We're going to discuss C.S. Lewis, Father Bede, Christian ashram movement, and the Inklings and various things.
Here we go.
Yeah, how about you? Have you been in BC your whole life, or?
No, grew up in Toronto. And then lived in Switzerland in the early 70s for a few years. And then I've pretty well been west since that. When I came back from Switzerland, we've lived out in British Columbia since the 70s.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, thank you for doing this. This is it's really nice. I've watched your YouTube videos for some time, so.
Oh, good. Which ones have you found helpful?
Your ones about, the ones that are most memorable for me were your ones on George MacDonald. Because I was a big MacDonald fan, introduced to him by C.S. Lewis, obviously.
Yes.
And then you talking about, I believe you did one, why George MacDonald turned in horror from the theology of St. Augustine.
Yes, yeah.
And that was very insightful. I enjoyed that one a lot.
Yeah. There's a whole the sort of neo-Calvinist tradition that draw from Calvin, Augustine, and their read of Paul in Romans and Galatians, which they think C.S. Lewis and MacDonald would be they're very suspicious, these people of MacDonald, even though they love Lewis, but Lewis himself just loved MacDonald. So you can't say.
It's weird when people are suspicious of MacDonald but love Lewis.
Yes,
because Lewis wrote that he thought that no one came closer to the mind of Jesus than MacDonald. In his mind. So he obviously thought that he was on the money on many things.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's but I think what you do is you get amongst certain neo-Calvinist and evangelicals a trivializing and a domesticating of Lewis. They shrink him to their wants and needs, and thereby they distort who he is. And then when Lewis turns to people like MacDonald, they don't quite get it because he doesn't fit within that Procrustean bed.
Yeah, or Father Bede, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Because both of them are sort of outside what a lot of mainline Protestants would be comfortable with, I think. But yeah, so thanks for doing this interview. And just some background for our listeners. This came about because I recently realized that a guy that I'd heard of, Father Bede, had a much greater impact on my life than I realized. And this is because like I was online and I saw the snippet of a letter between Father Bede and C.S. Lewis. And I've read the letters of C.S. Lewis before, but I never really paid attention to that name. And then one day this hit me as like, is that the same Father Bede? I just that I've seen. I was like, oh, it was. And I knew of him because of his influence on Rupert Sheldrake, who was, are you familiar with Rupert?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Rupert's like his morphogenetic field theory and all that. And of course, his interviews with Terence McKenna were just huge for me in breaking me out of scientific materialism. And I was aware that he was like under, well, Father Bede was basically the person that brought him back to Christianity, Sheldrake. And they had at least one interview that's recorded that I've listened to where they were talking about angels. And I saw this letter, the snippet of a letter, it said to Dom Bede. And I was like, is that the same Bede? And it was. And so then I started digging around and I saw that someone had written a book about their friendship. And it was someone named Ron Dart. I clicked on it, saw the author bio. I was like, oh, is this the guy from YouTube? That's the same. And so then I realized, hey, that is too many coincidences to ignore. So I decided that I should ask you to come on the show. And I think you're the first person on our podcast to have a Wikipedia page about them. That's something. I don't know. Yeah. So how did you're I guess first we should introduce you a little bit. So you're a professor at McMaster University, right, in Canada?
Oh, University of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia.
Oh, okay. I thought, yeah, I must have some old info. Yeah.
Well, I did my doctoral studies at McMaster in Hamilton, Ontario. Okay.
And you're an Alpine Club of Canada certified mountaineer?
Not a certified mountaineer, but I was at one point many years ago thinking of becoming a certified mountain guide, but I worked with the Alpine Club of Canada and BC Mountaineers, and then we have a Chilliwack Outdoor Club here in the Fraser Valley.
Oh, wow. Okay. So tell me a little bit about that first, if you don't mind, because like I've watched some of your videos and you don't really bring it up, but I get this sense just from listening to you that you're the sort of person for whom outdoors and nature is very much a part of your spiritual journey. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think the oxygen we breathe from the out of doors refreshes and nourishes our soul. And I think to the degree that we understand the relationship of humans and the natural world and the symbiotic relationship between them, also in mountaineering at its best, when you get in those high alpine slopes and upper ridges, you have a spacious view of reality and what you can see from the heights. And so you don't get to, Shakespeare would say, cabin cribbed and confined into little world views.
Oh, yeah.
There's a spacious Catholicity from being in the mountains that, you know, people who settle their little acreages, as it were, of intellectual thought and little parts of the mountain and call their little acreage the mountain.
Yeah.
So it's to me, mountaineering is also a metaphor for intellectual thought and a certain richness and fullness of intellectual thought as well. And be careful not to shrink reality, as I said, to a little acreage on the mountainside and call your acreage the mountain.
Yeah. Well, it's like Nietzsche said, don't trust any thought that you have indoors. There's some wisdom to that.
Yeah. I've spent time at Nietzsche's home in Switzerland.
Oh, really?
I did when I was doing my doctoral comprehensives. I had to translate Thus Spake Zarathustra from the German to English.
Okay.
But I spent time at his home in Sils Maria in the Engadine Valley, traveled all the trails Nietzsche did, where he had myth of the eternal recurrence of the same, and hiked up those trails. So yeah, no, I know the Seals Maria area south of St. Moritz very well, where I spent, as I said, there's a scholar in residence program at his home. And so I've spent time there. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you have any personal feats of mountaineering you'd like to share? Like some summit you climbed or something? Is it mostly hiking for you and skiing, or have you actually done rock climbing and that sort?
Yeah, I've done all of them. Some of the lovely trips in Canada. There's what they call the WAP to Traverse. It's called the High Route in Canada from the ice fields. It's about a 7-8 day trip. You can either ski it in the winter. There's 4 huts way up on the glacier. So you start from Peyto and move all the way down to WAP. That's a lovely 7-day trip. But on the West Coast, we have loads of great mountaineering trips, ski trips, touring trips on skis. So all season, mountaineering from, winter skiing and tour downhill. Live quite close to Whistler Blackcomb, so love getting up there skiing. We're right now building it's going to be the Spearhead Traverse. You ski around 13 glaciers. It's another lovely trip. No, I've done lots of peaks as well. When I lived in Switzerland, I was just right by the Jungfrau and the Monk and the Eiger. Lived in a cabin there. Some of those great peaks. And another time I lived quite close to the Matterhorn, Zermatt. And yeah, so lots of decades of mountaineering, and it's I've done a couple of books on mountaineering in the humanities, Thomas Merton and the Beats of the North Cascades. And so it's that whole mountaineering, outdoors, nature is just part of the genetic code of my soul. Yeah. I'm a climbing enthusiast myself. I'm not very good at it, mind you. Yeah. On a good day, I can get halfway up a 512. Yeah. But I'm usually stopped by the 511s, at some point. Yeah. But it's a work in progress. Oh, I'm bigger and heavier than most people that climb. So makes more work.
It does. Okay. So professionally, you're in, I guess, religious studies and political science. Is that right?
Well, the old humanities, so political science, philosophy, and religious studies. Yeah, so it's the classical humanities I've taught in for over 35 years.
Okay. Now, what got you into that? Because, I've listening to your lectures online. It seems like you could have easily been a sort of person that became like a minister or something like that, because you have you could be very good at homilies, and it just you sort of convey this spirit of more of a pastoral spirit, in my opinion. So what drew you into the academic route specifically?
When I was in my 20s and doing my first MA, I was particularly in classical thought, not only classical Greek and Roman thought, but classical Christian thought, the patristics, the mothers and fathers of the East as well as the West. And my advisor, I was doing a thesis on Thomas Merton and also John Cassian, and he said, the work you're doing is really the work of what many Anglican, Catholic, or Orthodox people who go on to become priests do.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said, have you ever thought of going on actually to seminary and becoming a priest? And so I went for a long walk with my wife. This would have been the mid 70s. It was in Vancouver, down by the ocean. And we chatted a lot about it. And she says, I think your vocation is probably the university will be your parish, and the lectern, as it were, at the university will be your pulpit. And she says, I think your vocation, even though your interest is classical Christian, I think you will work that out, not within formally the context of the classical form of Christianity, but within the university context, and do it bringing together wisdom and insight within a pastoral, as you say, a pastoral side, trying to evoke, call forth within people what they're meant to be in terms of their vocational life.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're, it may seem from a view of someone in the United States, like I've always viewed the infusion of politics with people's religion as a very United States thing, but you write about them sort of seamlessly from a Canadian perspective as well. And is that as unique to the United States as I think it is, or is that did we just do it more insanely, or is that something?
Yeah, perhaps you do it more insanely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a tradition in Canada. It's called high Toryism or red Toryism, and it doesn't fit nicely or snugly either into, in your American context, Republican or Democrat, or in Canada, leftist NDP or liberal or conservative. It transcends the tribalism of those tendencies while recognizing then in each of them there's certain truths, but certain blind spots, certain Achilles heel, yet certain insights. And so certainly the transition between spirituality, life in the church, and public responsibility is a very Canadian way of thinking, but it's a way of thinking that doesn't get trapped into certain ideological political tendencies and how that can dim the imagination and soul and mind, while honoring different attempts to embody those ideas in political parties.
Yeah, I've read that you, and I don't know if this is true, this is something I read, that you have been critical of the new conservative movement in like Canada, and that it is not in keeping with what you would call the high Tory tradition. Is that true? Are they tending more towards, I guess my question is, are they tending more towards the United States model of conservatism? Or
yeah, there has been in the last, well, really since World War II, as Canada moved away from its French, British roots and got drawn into the American gravitational field. There has been a tendency for the form of conservatism in Canada to, in one sense, ape or mimic or mirror the Republican tradition, whereas historic conservatism in Canada is what you call high Tory or red Tory, which is very different from conservatism or republicanism in the state. It has a view of the high view of the state, higher taxes, providing for the common good from coast to coast. And so our high Tory conservatism often seems for many to be closer to leftist thought, be leftist from your Democratic Party, even closer to Bernie Sanders or something, or maybe left of Sanders. Yeah, so it's a very different, we never broke from the European tradition in quite the way the United States did. So we come from a very different understanding of the common good, the role of state and society in a just way for providing for that through higher taxes. So it's, I've written about 10 books on high Tory. My big one that came out a few years ago is the North American high Tory tradition.
Okay. Yeah, because is that so? I think like religious conservatism in the U.S. is sort of like driven by Southern Baptists and evangelical. It sounds like that in Canada. It's more traditionally, at least, has been from like a high church Anglican position. Is that true?
Yeah. So one of the
you're Anglican, are you not? Or is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the great differences in terms of the founding of the United States and the founding of Canada at a religious level, the form of Christianity that played a significant role in founding of Canada was the Roman Catholic and the Anglican traditions. So when you translate those visions into politics, it's about the common good and the role of state and society working for the good of one and all. The form of Christianity that played a significant role in founding the United States was more the Protestant Puritan tradition.
Right.
And that is a very different understanding of religion and politics in regards to the state and society and the individual. And so they're two very, very different religio-political traditions, and also we never cut the umbilical cord with England and France in
Right.
quite the same way the United States did. So we're a very different people in the North in how we understand religion, spirituality, the church, politics, and so it's even though we live in the same continent, we're very different peoples.
Yeah, I've tried to explain that on the show before. Like, people think that down here, a lot of people think of Canada as like the 51st state.
Yes.
You know, and I said, well, no, they actually have a very different view on like how things should go.
Yes.
And though I think sometimes by political force, they're sort of Canada sort of has to go along with the U.S. just for politics reasons. They would rather not.
Yeah.
I feel, but so you wrote a book about Lewis and Bede, which is what prompted me to contact you. What drew you to their friendship? Specifically, like why write a whole book about this friendship between Bede and Lewis?
Well, I took in with my mother's milk the Inklings. So whether
I did too.
Yeah, so whether the antecedents, George MacDonald, Chesterton, Lewis,
Yes.
Tolkien, Barfield, Dorothy Sayers, any of this group was something I just grew up with. We just took this. These were people who articulated, who understood meaningful Christianity in a cultural, thoughtful, educational manner. And so Lewis specifically, his journey to Christianity, well, Bede Griffiths was a student of Lewis at Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to Christianity essentially at the same time in the late 1920s, 1930. And Lewis dedicated his second autobiography, Surprised by Joy, to Bede Griffiths.
I noticed that. And like I said, I've read these before, but at the time I read them first time through, I wasn't aware of who Bede Griffiths was. And then the second or third time I read them, I just didn't really pay attention to the dedication. And then I went back and like, oh, it's been there the whole time, and I never noticed it. You know, it's
Yes. The question for me, first of all, given the fact, and Griffiths is often ignored in the journey of Lewis to Christianity, even though he was one of his prized students. And Bede Griffiths' first autobiography, The Golden String, he mentions the significant role of Lewis in his journey. And so sometimes Tolkien and Barfield and others are credited with Lewis's turn to Christianity. But in fact, Bede Griffiths is a significant figure in that process, and he's often ignored. So one of my questions is, why has Bede Griffiths essentially been written out of the Inklings, written out of Lewis's journey? Any of the biographies of Lewis virtually ignore Bede Griffiths.
mm-hmm.
So that got my curiosity. It whet my curiosity to say who was. So, 15, 20 years ago, my question is, well, who is this Bede Griffiths, and why is he ignored in the Inklings Lewis, bibliographies and biographies?
Mm-hmm. And he's never mentioned. But I noticed that too when you pointed that out. I was like, he never comes up. But Lewis mentions him as, like, from the title of your book, his chief companion on the trip to Christianity, and his lifelong friend.
Yes,
it's crazy.
Yeah, when Lewis was dying, Bede Griffiths made the trip from India, where he, played a very significant role as a Roman Catholic and starting an ashram that dealt with, Christian-Hindu dialogue. And he came to see Lewis. And as Lewis was dying, he said, I have not had many long-term friends, but Bede, you are one of those people who I consider one of my deepest friends over the decades. And I want to thank you for being there for me. And Bede Griffiths also said, Lewis, you're one of the dearest people to me in my journey. And so I would also say amongst the Bede Griffiths people, there's often not a lot of work done on C.S. Lewis either. Yeah, so it goes both ways.
I think it's because they appear so disjointed from each other.
Yes.
And I think there's some really valuable things in understanding that those two people could not only see, if not see eye to eye, but like be the closest of friends.
Yes.
There's a real value in like string how that can be, because a lot of people can't even imagine how that could be possible. Because here you have Lewis, who is sometimes portrayed as extremely conservative, very sort of, I mean, like just in their differences on like war or violence. Like Lewis was in war. He was not. He would often write about how it was a bad necessity, and to some degree, Bede was a pure pacifist in a robe. Who was who was he was like a pacifist in a robe, just sort of your traditional sort of peaceful holy man in the East. And then somehow these two people come not only from the same background, but are connected in this deep way. And a lot of people just can't reconcile that. And I think they just shut one off from the other.
Yeah, I think to some degree, Lewis has been taken captive by a certain conservative audience or a conservative evangelical audience.
Yes.
And when you come to interfaith issues, certainly he'd have nothing to do with Griffiths and Christianity and Hinduism and ashrams. But in fact, Lewis made it very clear in the 50s as Bede was moving increasingly into Christian Indian interfaith dialogue that he encouraged Griffiths to do that. And Oxford was a real center of interfaith issues as well. And Lewis was at the center of some of these issues. R.C. Zahner, who got the Spalding Chair. Lewis, he would often speak at the Socratic Club. And so there's a whole element of Lewis's writings that have been largely ignored by those who have taken over Lewis but misrepresented Lewis in a way that makes it seem as if Bede Griffiths and he have nothing in common. And yet Lewis was broadly sympathetic to what in fact Lewis was trying to get at. And Lewis is sometimes seen as you're a rationalist or you're romantic. Lewis was a deep mystic.
Oh, yes. People don't credit him with that.
Yes.
You can hear it in his poetry.
Absolutely. Yes. And this gives him huge affinities with Bede Griffiths, who was a mystic, a contemplative. And so I was very interested also in the deeper contemplative element of Lewis, of which in many ways Bede Griffiths and he share on their journey that does lead to the bigger questions of interfaith contemplative heritages. And some people don't want to go that way. And so they shrink Lewis to not even dealing with those issues, but that distorts Lewis and it undermines any meaningful dialogue between Griffiths and Lewis. So you're not getting the full Lewis, you're getting a shrunken Lewis to serve certain ideological religious interests.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue from some of his writings, like particularly The Great Divorce, that Lewis really was quite a hopeful universalist that everyone and everything really would eventually be saved. And
this is his affinities to some degree with George MacDonald, and of course The Great Divorce. He's engaging MacDonald in this. Yeah,
MacDonald it appears as a character in that book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's as does William Blake, know, in his Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So Lewis was very fond of William Blake as well. And so this Blake, MacDonald, Lewis is grappling with these issues. He's not a dogmatic universalist, but he's certainly grappling with the nature of what would this look like. And if you go down that path, and what's the relationship of human choice, human no, human yes, the transformations we have to go through, the obstinacies we may have internally to not dealing with some of our shadows or our darker sides, which would then hinder moving deeper into the light of life. And so it's, he's certainly, and of course, Bede Griffiths grapples with this in certainly his writings in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then of course he dies in the early. I corresponded with Bede Griffiths in the 1990s, and I think I mentioned to you that I have all the correspondence of Bede Griffiths to the Canadian C.S. Lewis Society in my personal collection.
Oh wow! So, how would you say, if you could, and it'd be very difficult to do this, but if you could sum up the effect Bede Griffiths had on Lewis's journey, how would you do that? Because it seems to me, just from the short time I've spent on it, that he's always pulling Lewis, whatever tendencies Lewis had to become sort of solidified in one mode of thinking, Bede was always pulling him out of it. Is that accurate, or?
Well, there's various phases they go through in their journey. I cover this a bit in my book on Lewis and Griffith's chief companions. They both came to Christianity together in the late 20s. Now, Griffiths went in the direction of the Roman Catholic tradition, right. Lewis in the Anglican tradition, and they got into quite of a dust-up in the early 30s. Griffiths became a very dogmatic Roman Catholic.
Which is hilarious. Yes. How he ended up from where he started.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but those early mid 30s, Griffiths is a very pre-Vatican II dogmatic Catholic, and he's going after Lewis relentlessly, asking, why would you possibly become Anglican? Because that may be good for a beginning, but it's pretty superficial in terms of the fullness of the Catholic. And Lewis is always coming back at him and say, listen, this is not ecclesial war we need to fight. To be friends is, this is going to hurt and harm everyone. And so, and of course, Lewis's experiences, Northern Ireland and the battles there, he knew where these sort of ecclesial battles go when you translate Christ into an ecclesiology. And so Lewis was always moderating Griffiths in the early phase to say, come on, Catholic doesn't necessarily mean Roman Catholic. It means open to the fullness and the richness of how grace is engaged in the world of the soul and humankind and nature. And so throughout the 30s, they're engaged in this sort of touche, tete-a-tete, of which Griffiths is the aggressor and Lewis is moderating him.
That's hard to imagine from the Bede you get, the Griffiths you get as an older man. That's hard to imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But by the late 30s, what of course is happening is you get the Depression, then you get the war coming along. And both of them realize, listen, there are bigger issues than fighting over ecclesiology. We're having people killed, and let's deal with what the substantive issues are before us in terms of larger political issues. And there's no need to fight over Roman Catholic Anglican when in fact people are being killed across the water and slaughtered across the water in the name of German and Italian and later Spanish fascism. And so there is this coming together of Lewis and Bede Griffiths through the late 30s, 40s. After the war, then you begin to get Griffiths is beginning to consciously move into an interest in Indian religion. And Lewis, of course, being English, England was in India.
Right.
Yeah, so you have this very large highway culturally between India and England, given the fact it was a colony. Gandhi was moving at this time. Rabindranath Tagore is a part of this, the decolonization. And so Oxford was creating chairs and interfaith dialogue. Cambridge was in the center of all this. And so Griffiths is a part of this post-World War II, interested in Anglo-Indian interfaith issues. And so Lewis is also in the Socratic Club, increasingly so. There were a variety of issues that were being dealt with there, philosophically, theologically, exegetically. But one element was the whole area of interfaith issues as well. And Lewis was a key figure in inviting some key interfaith thinkers. R.C. Zaehner was probably the most important in all of that. But what you get by the 50s is increasingly so. Griffiths, from being the student of Lewis, he becomes the teacher to Lewis in terms of Christian Indian thinking, and Lewis encourages him in that. So the letters in the 50s between Lewis and Griffiths, he says essentially, go for it. The questions you're asking about depth, mysticism, the contempt, we need to learn from Indian thought on this.
Right. Yeah, I found that fascinating that Lewis so pushed him in that direction.
Yeah. He encouraged, he affirmed. The thing he said, he warned Griffiths, he says, the only thing, don't get frozen on only the Indian tradition. There's the Confucian tradition, there's the Taoist tradition. So if we're going to think interfaith, just don't reduce it to the Indian tradition and the Hindu tradition. Be broadly Catholic in terms of thinking larger interfaith questions. So, for example, his little book that he ends with, the Tao. He's very much thinking in terms of Chinese Taoism and Confucianism. Yeah. So he encourages Griffiths, think Chinese thought, not only Indian thought, but China has a rich culture of Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism. So, if
I remember correctly, in his book Miracles, or one of the other ones, he refers to Jesus as the Tao.
Yes,
I forget which one. Yeah.
So very much.
Yeah, he was very into that mode of thinking.
Yeah. And so, for example, his little book, The Abolition of Man, which
that one.
Yeah, it ends with the Tao. Okay,
right.
So in fact, what you have is Griffiths by the mid-late 50s is drawing Lewis into a richer and fuller understanding of Indian religion, particularly in Hinduism. Lewis has encouraged Griffiths to think about the Chinese tradition of the Tao and Confucianism. So they're engaged in this rich dialogue of a broader interfaith approach. And so it's not like Lewis retreats from the discussion. He's trying to widen Griffiths out to think, yes, go for it in terms of the Indian Hindu tradition, but don't turn against the Chinese Taoist tradition, Confucian either. And then, of course, by the early 60s, sadly so, Lewis died rather young.
Right.
So he never had a chance to really develop this in a fuller way, whereas Griffiths, after Lewis's death, he begins to really mature in these larger issues of interfaith, contemplative interfaith issues. And of course, Lewis is gone at that point. But then for Griffiths' concern was that there were many people who were so smitten by Lewis that he became a bit of an icon for many of them of how to think Christianity in a thoughtful way, but he got shrunken to serve certain Reformed, evangelical, even reactionary Catholic, Roman Catholic interests, even Orthodox interests. Griffiths began to write by the 1980s or 1970s, the Canadian C.S. Lewis Journal started, and many people were writing to it saying, this is what Lewis thought, and this is how Lewis would have dealt with it. And Bede says, listen, I was a student of Lewis, and this is not how Lewis would have engaged these issues. You're shrinking him to serve either Tridentine Catholic issues, Reformed evangelical, or Orthodox issues, and he was bigger than all of that. So all the letters Bede Griffiths sent to the Canadian C.S. Lewis Journal attempt to rescue Lewis from him being sort of reduced to a plaything of fairly reactionary Christianity. And I have all of those letters in my personal collection that I include some of them in my book then on Lewis and Griffiths, chief companions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know that Bede was overly successful in keeping him from being put in that box.
Yeah,
because he seems to have, like you said earlier, the mystical side of Lewis is completely ignored. Even though if you pay attention, it's all over the place.
Yes,
his poetry, but also it shows up in Narnia.
Yes,
and I mean it's everywhere. How do you? But it is like, how did Lewis, do you think, see? Because the charge against Bede Griffiths, he goes over to India, he dresses like a yogi, he has an ashram, but he's doing it in the name of Jesus, right? And so the charge made against him that is understandable is like, well, he's just he's either appropriating the Hindu culture, or he's trying to shoehorn himself into this? Or how did Bede and Lewis see what Griffith's project in terms of, like, did they see it as trying to understand Christianity through a different lens, or did they see it as just strictly an evangelical effort, or adopting the forms of someone else so they could be better understood? Like, what was Bede really trying to do by doing this wild thing where he goes over and starts an ashram in the name of Jesus and is wearing yogi costumes? Because he was a Benedictine monk, but also like this strange yogi fellow. Do you have a sense of? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the same sort of project Thomas Merton was engaged with.
Yes. Okay.
And Griffiths had a great affinity for Thomas Merton as well. I've done 4 or 5 books on Thomas Merton. And Griffiths had a great respect, even though Merton died in 1968, just a few years after C.S. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of things, I think a few things, when you think of interfaith issues. There's 2 extremes that Griffiths, Lewis, Merton, and others were trying to avoid. On the one extreme is that Christianity is absolutely right and all other religions are totally wrong. So it's a simple black and white. So why would you waste time other than conversion or mission or something?
Right.
So it's simple. It's the older, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem, as it were, or what has Christianity to do with Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Sikh, you name it.
Right.
The other, so the one position is that they have nothing in common, total discord. The flip side, the other extreme, is they're really saying much the same thing, which is a world of concord rather than discord, convergence rather than divergence. The third one is what Merton, Griffiths, Lewis are arguing, is this middle way between, at an intellectual level, what's their point of convergence and concord, and yet where are they different theologically, philosophically? So that's at the one level, the bigger model of trying to make sense of interfaith. The second level, which is the practical, is that the West has become so driven in terms of its busyness, its franticness, its doing. It's what Evelyn Underhill says, we spend so much time conjugating 3 verbs, to want, to have, to do, we forgot what it means to be.
Right.
And so this drug of the vita activa, on which the West is so preoccupied with uber busyness that it's lost the vita contemplativa. And so the task of which Lewis was concerned, Merton was concerned as a Cistercian monk, Bede as a Benedictine, is what sources are there not only in Christianity that can be recalled, which are contemplative, but in these other religions also, living religions today. How are, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, who are the sages and gurus in India that are still living out of a contemplative heritage in which people know the difference between the false self, the shallow self, and the deep self, and how is that process understood? And so there's this practical dimension of which has often been forgotten within the Christian tradition, but it also exists within other religions, the contemplative, meditative, mystical tradition. And then how is that appropriated or experienced? The same thing you find in T.S. Eliot, for example, in his early Wasteland, but finally 4 quartets that he's grappling. I lived for a time at Little Gidding in just outside of Cambridge when I was at Cambridge, and Eliot is deep mystic as well. Yeah, and he and Hermann Hesse, I did a book on Hermann Hesse as well. Very important writer who actually had most of his works engage Nietzsche quite often. But I think so at a cognitive level, you have these thinkers trying to avoid the extremes of total discord between religions. On the other hand, you want to avoid the other extreme where they're all saying the same thing. Our mystics are all saying the same thing. And there's this middle way of subtle and nuanced discernment where are they saying the same things and where are they not saying the same things? And what's the dialogue in this middle area, which Merton certainly explores, Bede, Griffiths. Lewis was very interested. He died too young, I think, to enter into a fuller. I mean, C.S. Lewis had a great respect for Thomas Merton. He thought he was one of the most brilliant writers, and Thomas Merton just loved C.S. Lewis. So these are another two that are often ignored. People don't often say C.S. Lewis, and you have the Merton groupies and the Lewis groupies, but most don't realize that the two of them had a great respect for one another.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Merton, so Merton and Griffiths are sort of like similar characters. They're both monks, one Trappist, one Benedictine, and they both take on the forms, because Merton was very interested in more of the Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Oriental religions. That's where his focus seems to have been. And then Bede on Hinduism. And so they're both trying to work those into Christianity or work Christianity out through them, one of the two. Is there something, and they were both sort of born around the same time, one I think 1906, one like 1910s or something. Was there something just like in the cultural water at the time that they felt the need to begin doing that? Is it the war? What caused like this sudden shift? Because you see it in Vatican II also, where they go from the pre-Vatican II church attitude is very different from the post-Vatican II. So what was causing this movement?
Well, I think at a larger cultural level, there's the end of Christendom as a civilization.
Yeah.
Fragmenting, obviously, through the centuries of Christianity. There's the dominance of a type of secularism, which is anti-religious. There's the longing for people in terms of a form of spirituality, which isn't that uber vita activa. People are realizing there's a certain emptiness in this extreme busyness. It's a sort of running away from the self. It's a drug. It's an escape rather than slowing down and being still. There's the emergence of all these other religions are becoming, so rather than, civilizations living in splendid isolation, you in fact are getting increasingly so various major and minor religions converging in the same, similar to the late antique Roman Empire, that in fact all of these different Christianity was born into a period of religious pluralism.
So it really should be at home here.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. So I think there's a multiplicity of cultural, social, historical causes. I also think there was a certain guilt amongst Americans after World War II with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That many of the Beats, I've done a couple of books on Thomas Merton and the Beats. Many of them went to Japan to study with Roshis, and particularly Suzuki was a very important, D.T. Suzuki, bridge between Japan and the United States. And so there was this belief, they were our enemy, but in fact, their spirituality and their meditative approach goes much deeper than any sort of actual form of Christian religion at the time. So we can learn from that because it seems to have disappeared within Christianity, both within Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. And so there was this hunger for depth, hunger for silence and solitude, and what is revealed in the quietness of silence and solitude, and a great deal of the broader culture, as well as Christianity, which was sailing on that water, had been so taken in by a hyper busyness in which people had lost any sense of any inner centeredness or the still point in the moving world, as T.S. Eliot would say, that they're then turning to other religions. And so Merton, Bede, Griffiths, C.S. Lewis, there's many others, of course, they tend to be fairly well known, but the Beat tradition of Jack Kerouac, Gary Snyder, Philip Whalen, Kenneth Rexroth, there's a whole movement towards not just intellectual interfaith issues, but the applied existential contemplative element as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, the monasteries are almost completely all gone. Once upon a time, we had them, and there's still a few hanging on, but I mean, it's nowhere near like you're saying. Largely in Christianity, right now there is no current contemplative active tradition happening. It is very much go to church on Sunday and then don't think about it again.
Well, there are forms, I think, post Burton, post Griffiths. There are movements,
Yeah.
centering prayer and Thomas Keating and what goes on at New Camaldoli and Big Sur. And so there are a variety of forms at the present time of Christianity, both monastic and non-monastic, that are attempting to reclaim that
Yeah.
deeper contemplative heritage. And these all stand in the shoulders of people like Bede Griffiths and Thomas Merton and C.S. Lewis, and there's many other people as well. But the whole sort of centering prayer tradition of Basil Pennington and, as I said, Thomas Keating, and retreat centers and conference centers. And so Finley, for example, is very popular for many people, who was a novice under Merton. His work on Palace of Nowhere and everything that's come out after that, James Finley. And so there is in a variety of ways within Christianity today, not only a hunger for this, but there are women and men who are embodying how this element of the faith journey one can be attentive to, cultivated, and grow into it. So you have wiser, deeper, insightful people. And these are all children of Merton, Bede Griffiths, C.S. Lewis, and Evelyn Underhill would have been earlier. Very key person I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of, there's this one quote from a letter between Lewis and Griffiths, which I think sort of talks about why they were doing this. And like you said, there was a need to recapture this because people were leaving, going after other religions. And so Lewis said to Bede, "I think a glance at my correspondence would cheer you up. Letter after letter from recent converts, by ones and twos, often married couples with children. It amounts to nothing by the standards of world statistics, but are those the right standards? I sometimes have a feeling that all the big mass conversions of the Dark Ages, often carried out by force, were all a false dawn, and that the whole work has to be done over again." So like that right there, he's sort of like C.S. Lewis is sort of wondering whether the whole project has to be restarted. It's yeah.
No, very much so. So the whole sort of the Billy Graham tradition of big crusades, large conversions, rallies, and which seems to be numerically the growth of faith. It's about as deep as a puddle. And
yeah, it's the seed thrown on the rocky ground.
Yes, yeah. So what seems to be the expansion and, in one sense, growth of Christianity again is just a short term that is not going to hold in the tempests and winds of time. And Lewis was acutely aware of this as a medieval Renaissance scholar, that without depth, what seems to be growth, in fact, is not going to last very long, because there's no deeper contemplative content. They were all very interested in the breakdown of Western civilization that was losing a spiritual depth. Yeah. Hermann Hesse, as I mentioned earlier, is a part of this. T.S. Eliot's a part of this. And so to understand these larger cultural issues and the implosion within the West of any depth, people like Lewis and Hesse and Eliot and Merton and Griffiths, they're like the canaries in the mine shaft. I don't know if you have in the United States and Canada, we would have miners go into the shaft. They bring little canaries in the cage. If the canary went down, it meant there were toxins in the shaft, and they would hurry back up.
Right.
So these artists and thinkers, they're like canaries in the mine shaft. They pick up the toxins of modernity, and they realize, things are out of joint, to use Hamlet's phrase.
Yeah.
So increasingly, as times has moved on, I think people have realized that it's Charles Taylor in Canada, great philosopher, talks about the malaise that many people feel, or sort of the betrayal of depth. And people like Lewis and Hesse and Eliot and Griffiths, these are the canaries that are alerting people that something's wrong. So then, what is that which is the problem? And then what turns do we make to recover our souls so we don't lose our spirit and our souls as we continue the journey forward, not only individually, but as a culture and as a civilization? So these are all key women and men, that people should be attuned to, because they see, they hear. In that sense, they're prophets as well as contemplatives, and so very important.
Yeah, and I think they've largely been proven correct. I mean, the spiritual essence of Western culture has done nothing but decline since that time. So we like to keep it about an hour, but before we wrap up, we usually have two questions. Because this show also deals with some paranormal things and that sort of thing. And you being an outdoorsman, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot?
Well, where I live is just down the road from Harrison Lake, which is the center of Sasquatch Company.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you ever come to where we live, there's huge statues of Bigfoot and Sasquatch all over the place. Yeah, so now whether they exist or not, that's an interesting story, or whether you see them loping through the mountains or through the forests or over snowfields, that's always a matter of conjecture. There's lots of interesting stories written on the Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Sasquatch, but just down the road, people come from all over the world to go to Harrison Lake, where the people claim to be sightings of Sasquatch or the Yeti or the Bigfoot.
Right. And you've never personally seen one?
No, other than statues and wooden virgins. No.
Okay. Have you ever had any experience that you would regard as paranormal or supernatural?
Well, I guess, first of all, it would depend on what a person means by that.
Yeah, right.
I think, to me, the deepest meaning of supernatural is that, in fact, in our journey, the nature of transformation from a false, narcissistic, egoistic center to a much more generous, gracious new being is probably the deepest meaning of the supernatural, in which we move away from our false self, or what C.S. Lewis would talk about, until we have faces. And in fact, we move away from our false face, our false understanding of identity, into, in fact, our eternal understanding of who we're meant to be. And that involves, as Dante so well understood in the Divine Comedy, going into the inferno of what has to be burned away, through the purgatorio, and finally into the paradiso. So some people can sometimes identify the supernatural with some intense experience, either induced through drugs or some defined intense epiphany. But I think the deepest meaning of the supernatural is the transformation from our false self, our egoistic, our narcissistic, and allowing that to die, and then, in fact, being reborn into our eternal new being, of which Lewis and Merton and all of these people grappled with. And that's the deepest meaning of the supernatural, is that the divine breaking in, burning the dross of what we are not, so the gold of who we actually are will emerge. I don't know, does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a good answer. Some people answer that in all sorts of different ways. We had one guest on that said one time when they were in their room, they looked up and they saw a half man, half lion standing in the room, glowing with light. It's like, wow, that's interesting. So you never know what people are going to say when you ask that question. What are you? I know you're currently doing a Lenten series of Lenten reflections on YouTube. Are you working on anything else at the moment?
Yeah, so as we're in Ash Wednesday, I'm going over the 6 sections in T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday. So I do one every week, get taped, and then I'm moving slowly into T.S. Eliot's much more substantive work, which is really the summary of his great contemplative vision, the 4 quartets, which you can spend a lifetime meditating slowly on, allowing those images and metaphors to massage the mind, the imagination, and so that's what I'm lingering very, very much with TLC. And as I said earlier, the last of the 4 quartets, Little Gidding, I lived at Little Gidding for a time when I was at Cambridge in the 1990s as well. So T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis were very good friends.
Yeah, it was all sort of connected.
Yeah, so I mean, in the early 20s, 30s, the Inklings mocked Eliot, and Eliot would not publish Lewis. But by 1945, Charles Williams said, "Listen, you two, stop acting like little kids and turning on one another." So he brought Eliot and Lewis together for a dinner at Oxford. Williams died the next day. But from throughout the 1950s until Lewis died, you couldn't separate T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis. It was Canterbury, the church, that asked Eliot and Lewis to do a revisionist translation of the Psalms to bring them up to date. And so the T.S. Eliot-C.S. Lewis friendship is another. I did a long article on Lewis and Eliot many years ago. That looks, again, you'll get people, you have the T.S. Eliot people and you have the C.S. Lewis, without realizing, once again, these were very dear friends, like Griffith Lewis. And
just another question. So you got Tolkien, Lewis, Eliot, Bede, Merton, all of them are sort of in the milieu with each other. Was Chesterton how did they see Chesterton? Was he in there in any way in their minds?
Oh yeah, he like George MacDonald was seen as a forerunner or an antecedent. Okay. Lewis had the great admiration for Chesterton,
right?
And so so people like George MacDonald, Chesterton, and there's others who really anticipate in some ways the Inklings, and so they build on the work of Chesterton, the work of George MacDonald, and there's others as well. And so, yes, Chesterton was very, very much admired by the Inklings. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you for doing this. This was great. It was very helpful for me.
Okay, and I've got my dear wife tapping on the door with my daughter saying dinner's ready, so I should scamper.
Well, all right. Thank you so much again.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a good evening.
You too.
Targets up here, we just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast and went right over the top of us.